later.
Yeah, I'm leaving. All right, so you're all set up on the, you want to probably access control the computer.
Yeah.
On the share screen. Sorry.
No, that's fine. There are chairs out there for all you.
Everybody can put their.
Bob, if you want, I got a minute for your session. I'm moving. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
Jeff. I mean, Jeff all by himself, I guess.
Thanks.
Heather, we've been up there a couple times.
Have you?
Obviously, yeah, we're looking. So Tyler's up there yesterday. I was up there today. So, all right, you get the report?
Got the report. You said there was something else you wanted to talk to me?
Nope, that was it.
Oh,
No, I'm good. No, I'm good.
Thank
I put in your door, you weren't home. I just want to make sure you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. Anything else, Tyler?
yeah.
Okay,
Neil, I think we're gonna be covered.
okay, all right. But if you need something else,
Cool, thank you.
tell us. You're not supposed to recognize me, so.
You're incognito.
I'm going to burger night when, maybe lower. Really.
I was gonna ask for undercover fries.
What's that?
If you ask me if I needed anything else to say, a burger and fries.
Well, they don't have fries, it's just potato chips, so the Legion.
He didn't really offer it.
No, I didn't.
No, I'm sorry.
I think you put it out there pretty clearly.
I wasn't ready for it.
I'm sorry, sir.
I'll be back. No, I'm good though. Actually, it makes sense. I want to be behind you.
Can't joke.
Oh, no, sorry, I'm so
That's
sorry.
all
My
right.
bad. You lived up on.
I'm Arbor, and
Yep.
now I'm living in a rental on Fairview, and I'm building a house.
Whereabouts?
You can click in the middle on state. I'll show you.
Okay.
So if anybody feels like they want to get up and take a gander, the map of all of the short-term rentals, I've got a paper copy here. I don't know if we had this out at a previous meeting or not.
Wish you could print it bigger for us.
We'll have it up on the screen as well.
That's great.
I didn't have the opportunity to put it on a hardback, put it on an easel or something.
Jeff, are we expecting Emily?
The only people that contacted us and said they couldn't make it was Barry and George. So I think, but even if Emily isn't here,
Who's that?
I think we're still okay. Yeah. Because really, we don't really have very many things on the agenda that we need to take action on.
Yeah. I'll get there a little early.
Welcome back.
That's like the other stack to get.
It's a booster thing.
I want to get a schedule. I want to get the schedule to figure out what. Like that changes.
You can have a padded chair.
Yeah. I was out of the office Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday last week, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so I came in Wednesday afternoon and today trying to catch up on everything. So it's been fun. He's at dinner with his wife. It's her birthday tonight, so we're running the show for him. But he's not far, he's just down in you could just take the meeting down there and join him for dinner, right?
There you go.
Oh, here he is.
Jeff, could you pass John's name tag over to him?
That would be John. You can be John.
I see that.
See you, Victor. We've never fixed John's name tag.
Is it still, what's on?
Thank you.
Oh, that's, I thought we ordered a new, I'll have to talk to Bridget about that.
every meeting, it should be different. Just
Just keep changing it up. I apologize.
People on their toes.
Well, it's 5:30, so let's get started. I'd like to call this meeting of the City of Harbor Springs Planning Commission to order. It is Thursday, August 18th, 2022. All right, Jeff, could we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Rick Tarczynski.
Here.
Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Bob Fulmuth here. Bill Mulder.
Here.
Mark Viday. Here. Al Dyke.
Here.
All right, that's 6. We have a quorum.
All right. Let's talk about the minutes from last time. Planning commissioners, did you have a chance to take a look at those minutes?
Yes, I move to approve the minutes.
Does anyone have any corrections, or would someone like to second that?
Second.
Second, we'll call it Bob Thoma. All in favor of approving the minutes as written for the last meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's move into public comment and correspondence. And first of all, members of the public, welcome and thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's a beautiful night. Thanks for taking your time to come and participate in what we're doing here. And this part of the meeting is where members of the public can comment on something that is not on the agenda. And the way it works is everybody gets, anyone who cares to, gets a 3-minute slot to give your very best comment. One time. Okay, anyone like to make a comment at this time? All right, thanks very much. Well, then let's get on to new and old business. First thing on the agenda is a new topic that I am suggesting that we consider, and it has to do with our guest quarters regulations. And I put together our current language. Let me go to it myself here. And some highlights and some questions about whether or not it's time for us to consider some possible changes to our guest quarters regulations. And the main points of the regulations are that number one, if you have guest quarters, it can only be used by friends and relatives. And those friends and relatives can only stay 21 consecutive days. And then they have to go away for 30 days. And then they could come back if you invite them, I guess. And under no circumstances can guest quarters be rented. And I guess the only other aspect is that we do require a special land use approval when you're building and establishing guest quarters on your property. And those are the main aspects that I thought we might want to take a look at and see if those are they still make sense for the city of Harbor Springs today, or if the world has changed and it's time to reconsider some new things. So maybe we could take a look at the 21-day limit. And what I observed during the COVID period is that families wanted to get together and to, kind of hunker down together and get through stressful times. I know my family did. And, all our kids converged here and, it was nice. It was really nice. And, it was such an uncertain time that it did help people get through. And I heard anecdotal evidence of a lot of families doing the same thing, grown kids and their kids coming up to be with their folks here. So it was a great place to be. So the question I thought we could examine is, does the 21-day limit still make sense? Or, especially in these days of remote work and more flexible working arrangements, I know family members are staying longer and, it's been a wonderful thing for people. So maybe if we kind of chunk it out like that, do you have any thoughts on the 21-day limit for guest quarters?
Years ago, when my granddaughters were that age, they'd come up here and they would work for the summer. And not being able to have them in the guest quarters more than 21 days bordered on ridiculous. I mean, I had to we had to make arrangements to shuffle them off to a neighbor's after 21 days or break the law. So I elected to break the law for a number of years. And that situation goes on. At Irish, we continue to hire young people, a lot of them who are not from here, who live with grandparents in guest quarters or fixed up garages or whatever. And it just causes mayhem. Well, what's the purpose?
And of course, there is no limit. The city has no say about how long someone stays in your guest bedroom inside your house. So there's no 21-day limit there. Al, do you have any history on this or? any
Well,
recent thoughts?
yeah, I was, when we made that rule, I was on a council. And it never made sense to me. To me, if you're gonna allow these secondary residences on a piece of property, which I think is a good thing, then I think they should be rentable for year round. If you know, a young couple or a retired couple wants to live in a garage apartment or something that's on a property, why not let them? I never understood the 21-day thing.
Other thoughts?
Well, it's not really enforceable, is it?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, and let's look, we gotta start getting away with some of these things that just simply aren't enforceable as well, so.
And I do think though that, to me, the longer time period is better than the shorter.
I agree.
Just to, more along the lines of, yeah, go rent out to a retired person, or maybe actually the people who own the house. Yeah, this happens a lot where they move into the guest quarters, so their family starts growing their own family in the original family house.
It is a trend.
And so that's happening quite a bit across the country. The one thing though, when I thought about this a little bit more, was that we're adding more population, which we want to be able to do that, but we have to deal with issues like sewage and things like that. So we're increasing, we have to make sure we have enough capacity if we were to, like, say, increase our population by 100 people or something by doing this. But overall, I think it's 21 days. What does that mean? It seems like longer periods. Of course, it couldn't be used as short-term rentals at all. But long-term rentals, I don't have a problem with that.
I don't know if the sewer authority counts short-term periodic rental
I don't
any
know.
differently than a full-time
Yeah.
thing
Okay.
when they're doing their counts.
Is that calculated in already?
I think it's already.
I know that they
calculated.
were allocated so many tabs. I don't, is it tabs or?
I think it's, I could be wrong on this. We should check with Victor or someone from the Department of Public Works, but I believe it's more on like gallons of whatever that they process over the given year. And that we're allotted so many gallons of gray water or whatever water. So I think the difference would be in just how much use. If we switch from incidental seasonal use to more long-term use, there's that increase in the amount of material that they're receiving that could potentially affect what we do. I know for some things we look at tap count. We also look at REUs, residential something units. And that we may need to look at those homes that have those and maybe saying that they get 2 instead of 1 or something like that.
I hate to get us in trouble with sewer authority.
But we want to make sure that we're doing whatever we need to for that.
I just know like if someone has a septic system, they count the number of bedrooms when they size the drain fields, capacities and all that. So I just don't know. But that's one thing that, certainly in support of changing this, but we should check that just to make sure we don't get in that place. I don't know.
If I could offer another thought here, if we're talking about removing the limitation, I guess that's a side question. Are we talking about completely removing the limitation on duration of stay? Say that people could stay there year round, or extending it to be, instead of 21 days, 2 months?
Don't know yet, you know,
Yeah.
we're just forming.
And my follow-up thought would be, if we're talking about removing the duration of stay, I don't think that there's much of a difference in use between extended families staying and occupying it, whether it's a mother-in-law suite versus renting it out to somebody to live in. And that we should also consider as part of this, looking at our language that says that they cannot be rented. And maybe change that to say cannot be rented for less than period of time.
I like that point about it opens up to everybody, not just family close friends.
Because realistically, if we say there isn't gonna be a time duration anymore, I think we're going to see rental situations come up, and how is that different than a situation where, you know, we live here and our mom and dad live in the mother-in-law suite type of thing.
That's right. Oh, I need to bring something up. I have guest quarters, just built it. And so I'm gonna recommend that if we decide to vote on something, I don't want to vote, but I would love to talk about it with you if commission thinks that that's an okay arrangement. Otherwise, I'll just be quiet.
Talk.
Please, Tom.
Prefer that?
Sure.
Thanks.
I have a question for Al.
Yeah.
Did this 21-day thing, has that happened during your time here? Or?
Yeah,
Okay.
when we started to allow the rentals.
And what was the?
I don't
What was the
recall the
logic
reason.
behind the 21 day?
It wasn't the universally popular idea. So we approached it cautiously, and it's just stayed there. There's been no further discussion that I know about. Okay, but that was just when we started to allow these.
So you were
rentals.
easing the opposition,
Yeah,
and it's still easing.
it was a
nobody.
compromise that we reached, you know, with those opposed.
So there are really two things we're hovering around, and that is 21-day limit. I guess there's 21-day limit, friends and relatives
Family.
Specification. And then should we allow long-term rental of some duration, 3 to 6 months or more?
I think it's a rental or it's not.
I agree with you. Why
You
ever?
know,
why
it's
limit
that simple then to me.
the rental?
And what about, what's your feeling about short-term rentals? Am
Extend them to a half-year minimum.
I?
That would take care of a lot of problems.
So you would be in favor of a minimum rental stay or contract? All right. What about the concept of? Did you ever get to comment? Did you? Did you get to comment on any of this?
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm good. I think I like the 21 days. The reason I think it probably happened was people that had them didn't want people staying for more than 21 days, and this would give them the legal reason to get rid of it. Fishing guests after 3 days, that whole thing is the only reason I could think that it was put there in the first place. And I also think that if somebody needed longer, isn't there a process they can ask for a variance on?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, that's a question.
I don't think so. So a variance, when you talk about applying for a variance to the zoning board, you're asking the zoning board, I want to do something that other properties are able to do, but a limitation with my property is preventing me from complying with the rule. So in asking for a variance to be able to occupy something for longer, what other properties are already able to do that? You're not really asking to be brought up to the level of standard for everyone else. You're asking to be brought past that level of standard. So I don't know that that's really maybe appropriate. I think a good way to compare this is realistically, we're talking about another form of a duplex here. They're just not connected by one building. We're just looking at 2 dwelling units per se on a piece of property, as opposed to 1 dwelling unit with some accessory use.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is you could have a mother-in-law quarters appended to your house with a separate door and everything, and the city has no say over that. We don't say 21 days, we don't say friends and family.
That would be a second dwelling unit, and that would turn that property into a duplex, which would only be permissible in R2 zoning district,
Okay,
not R1.
Thanks for the clarification.
Rick, what is it that you're afraid of?
I just think that if we get into changing regulations and things start to get muddy and we give up the 21-day thing, and the next thing you know, it's going to be short-term rentals all over town. And that's a direction I don't think we should be moving into. On the other hand, I think limitation on long-term is great. If we go on long-term, 180 days. Although I don't like the idea of the traffic, I think this would be closer to a bed and breakfast type of thing, so that you have the owner, as long as the owner is living in the main house, I don't see any reason why we couldn't rent it out short term. I'm mostly against out-of-town operations. If we have a true resident operator,
Because why are you so
because they'll
vehemently
keep an
opposed to
eye on
this?
things, they'll take care of the property, they'll make sure nobody makes too much noise. I have a out-of-town ownership, short-term rental next door to me. They don't keep up the property. People cause trouble all the time. There's often twice as many people living there as there should be. So
What you're suggesting is that people drive past my home at a high rate of speed. So I think all the roads should be closed. That's what you're saying.
no,
Think
it's
about
not.
it.
I'm saying,
Because you have
if you
some
don't live in that
unfortunate
house-
situations next to your house. You want to punish an entire community.
That's correct. Because
Works for
if
me.
you're on property, you're gonna take care of them. If you're not, they're running wild like 2-year-olds.
I don't know how many we have.
So if they want to be a bed and breakfast, then have somebody on site to take care of
We average about 2 per year.
it. Otherwise,
Since
they're
I've
a
been
business.
Who's
They
going to
don't
administrate
belong in
this?
a
Who's going to pay the
residential.
people that administrate this? I said, who's going to administrate this? Who's going to pay the people that administrate?
That's their job. If they want to run it out short term, they're gonna have somebody on site. If they want to be a hotel, they gotta have somebody at the desk.
My sense is community would not be in favor of allowing short-term rentals in guest quarters. But
I know they won't,
Yeah.
but that would be my compromise.
Can I offer some further insight on a couple of things here? Bill, you emailed me a while ago with a question about it, and John just asked me the same question. How many do we have in town? I can't tell you how many we have overall because we really haven't kept track that well, but what I can tell you is how many we've done since I've been here. I started in 2015. Since that point, we've been averaging about 2 special land use requests per year at the Planning Commission for requests for people to do these as accessory dwelling units as guest quarters. From those meetings, I think there's a couple important things that come into play here at this conversation. Typically, we are talking about an accessory building. And right now, our language in the zoning code allows accessory buildings to be much closer to the side yard and rear yard setbacks. As an example, in the R1c zoning district, our side yard setback is 8 feet for the principal building. The rear yard setback is 30 feet. Whereas for an accessory building, which guest quarters are currently now part of an accessory building, they can be 5 feet away from the side yard setback or 5 feet away from the rear yard setback. And one of the few things that have been the concerns from neighbors regarding accessory buildings is that close proximity. And in a couple of cases, we've had conditions where the applicant has offered to move that building farther back away from the side yard property line to, instead of being 5 feet away, be 10 feet or something, to provide a little bit more space. Because we are typically talking about a building that's where a garage might be 1 story, a garage with accessory living above it is 2 stories. And you know, the complaint we've heard has been, there's a 2-story building now 5 feet away from my property line. But that was one to give you an idea of about how many we've looked at since I've been here. We've approved about 14 of them over 7 years. And then 2 to provide some insight of, I think that's about the only concern that we've heard that I'm recalling of that use by neighbors.
Yeah, that's the one that was Maple. That was the one that was up on Maple. He wanted the accessory unit and he voluntarily moved it in and also lowered the height a little bit. So that one worked out. So the neighbors were.
I think there was a similar of discussion on the one that went in down on 3rd Street-ish. I think it was Gordon Andrews on 3rd Street, just down past the church. He owned 2 lots and he built the house and then and I think he voluntarily moved it farther from the side yard line as well.
And another consideration on this, if we do extend this and change this, is perhaps parking. There would be some parking component to this as well. We would have to make sure you don't have people parking on streets. So maybe you have to have additional parking on-site parking spot if we go down this road. I can see that being.
A lot of issues. It opens up a lot of things for discussion.
Yeah, it does. I think it's worth it though.
I do too.
I was trying to think how many guest quarters I knew of in the city, and we have 1,200 dwelling units approximately. They're certainly not 10%, do you think? 120? People in the audience, you may shake your head or not 120. Were there 5% would be 60. Are there 60 out there? Doesn't seem like it.
It's more like 3 or 2%.
Might see a big increase in them if we go down this road.
Oh, sure.
You know, people would jump all over it. I would. I wouldn't hesitate.
You would. Okay, I would have no interest in running my place. I don't think I want anybody else in my backyard. But, you know, my thought was, you know, if maybe, what are there 50 in the city? If there's 50 and maybe 1 or 2 people would want to rent out long-term, and that could help 2 families a whole lot. All right, well, let's hold on to that for a minute. And let's talk about the idea of requiring special land use approval for people to build guest quarters. We do that only in some zoning districts. We don't do it in others. In the bigger ones, R1A and R1E, we don't require special land use approval to build guest quarters.
So Al, what was the thinking behind that? Why were some gonna have to have it and others not?
I don't really know. R1A has always been the district. It was the big lots down,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
3rd Street and that area. And those have always been allowed to have an accessory dwelling. The rest of the town wasn't allowed to at all. And I guess it's still that way unless you get a variance.
Unless you get a special land use.
So just
I guess
history.
Maybe it's just tradition.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Those are the bigger lots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to have a certain size lot to do that, because when we did our development, we gave up packing a lot of small lots in there so that we could do it R1A, so that if somebody wanted to build an accessory, you know, a garage with an apartment above for their in-laws or whatever, you know, they could do that. And that's why we did the Easy Street the way we did. Those lots are big.
Mm-hmm.
We could have put 13 lots in there, instead we put 5.
I think one of the advantages of requiring special land use approval is that the neighbors get a look at the plan beforehand and get a chance to comment.
It's a
And
good
in the
idea.
smaller lots, maybe that does make sense. Maybe it's a courtesy. And
I just think the criteria would be very important to really look at the criteria again and make sure that the criteria fit, the situation with what we're trying to create. Because it's one thing to have comments on it, but the criteria of why you say yes and why you say no has to be pretty clear, right?
okay, commissioners, would you care to get some public comment on it at this point? Sure.
Sure.
All right, do we need to, okay, members of the public, does anyone have any thoughts on this issue?
Okay.
And
I have some thoughts.
you may introduce yourself.
I'm Paul Tripp. I live at 133 Snyder. Maybe this isn't in good order, but in other municipalities, they require you to have short-term rental licenses. Like everybody should have one to operate. But the city then goes back and they put in a limit of short-term rentals below what already exists. As people, they sell their house, the house doesn't sell with the right to have that. There should be a way to stop this proliferation of short-term rentals in an easy way.
Well, we're gonna look at a specific recommendation on that in our next item, in our next agenda.
I think that the city's desperate need of infill. We need more housing. I think to be able to have a long-term rental in your house, to rent it to wherever you want, to be able to either have income from that, or to supply housing to somebody who needs it. I think the city has to be a bit careful in the laws we pass, because if suddenly people can generate income out of another dwelling unit, the prices of houses may go up. It's just something to consider as to what are the impacts of what you do pass. But certainly, I'm in favor of having those houses in there. You might think about, giving special benefits to people who already have homesteads. If you have a homestead, you can generate some other income, because if you're homesteading, it means you're on the property. You can watch it. In some municipalities, when you build a large house, say 5,000 feet, you're required to have an accessory dwelling unit, because you're going to employ maids, you're going to have painters, you're going to have whoever it would be. You have to have it. Some, they even require you to rent it. They have somebody, when you build these giant houses, it takes labor. And you need to contribute to that. Or sometimes if they don't want to do that, they put money into a fund for housing. Because that's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions. Lisa Nichols, 638 West Bluff Drive. When we're talking like an accessory building that has a guest quarters, what constitutes the guest quarters? Does it have to have running water? Does it have to have a bathroom? Does it have to have a kitchen? Can it just be a room with a bed and sitting area? And these people could be, what kind of constitutes that?
Let's go to our answer man on that.
Our zoning code has a couple lines in it regarding this topic. The one is if there's any space in that structure that could be made habitable. And we kind of worded it that way. And I think primarily what we're talking about is when we have, let's say, a garage that has an area above it. We have language that states that if that area above is greater than 50% of the level below, it requires special land use approval, and if it could be made habitable, it requires special land use as guest quarters. And I believe the thought on that was, if somebody comes in to me as the zoning administrator and says, I want to build a garage, but it's going to be 2 stories, but upstairs is only gonna be storage, I promise, right? 2 years later, they change their mind, or they sell it to the next individual who says, I have this upstairs. I wanna put an apartment up there, I wanna put some type of living. That doesn't necessarily require them to come back for zoning approval. They can just go to the building department to pull whatever mechanical permits or whatnot to add whatever amenities are needed to make that transition. So to alleviate the need for us to go on site and say, is it still storage or is it now living? We just say right up front, whether it's going to be stored, whether your intent is going to be storage or your intent is going to be some type of living, we're going to go through that process to make sure that it meets the requirements of our special land use. So that
when
if you
we
make that
say,
change,
the habitable, what do we mean by that?
ceiling height of greater than
it's more of a
7 feet
area
6
thing?
inches, I think is part of it. There's some language in there that kind of further defines that, but
But it doesn't mean that it has to have a bathroom or water.
no, because the issue is those are things that they can go to the building department for permits later and
Right.
add.
Right, but
Without
they could
coming
have
to
someone
us.
living in there without those things, and they're just running to the house and using that if it's one of their relatives or their, friends.
That's why we would require that approval,
Okay.
even if they don't choose to put those amenities in.
Right. And then the second question was, when Bill gave that example about like a addition for like the mother-in-law, and you made a comment that it would be considered a second dwelling, I didn't really understand that. When we were talking about like if it was something attached, like and you said, yeah, it'd be like a duplex, but it's really, it's like this room that has a little living room and a kitchen and a bathroom, and the mother-in-law is gonna live there and it's attached to the house. That wouldn't be a second dwelling.
Well, it had its own entrance.
If it has its own
entrance,
entrance
so
and it's able to
that
be
private?
separated from the rest of the home by a, like, say, a locked door, that is a separate dwelling unit.
Okay. So the own entrance thing is really that. All right, thank you.
Any other thoughts from the audience on this one? Okay, Carol.
Carol Winard at 141 Snyder, next door to Paul. I have a couple questions. One is, what's the rationale to have the auxiliary building setback 5 feet and the main house 8 feet? If in fact we're gonna open up this concept of the guest quarters, why would the guest quarter be able to be within 5 feet of the setback, but the main house have to be 8?
I'm making a guess here. We've had language in our zoning code regarding accessory structures long before we've had the ability for people to put guest quarters within an accessory structure. So at some point in time, I think we even maybe had language that said that accessory structures could be right up to a property line. We have a lot of areas in town where garages are sitting right at the property line. So I think that we had that language of allowing garages to be, detached garages or sheds and things like that to be closer to property line because they're generally smaller in size. And then at some point, I think in the late 80s or early 90s, we added language that allowed guest quarters in accessory dwellings. And I'm making a guess because I wasn't here at the time. Well, I lived in town, but I was 16. But I think we added that language allowing guest quarters and maybe didn't make that change or felt that that would be addressed through the special land use approval process. That if that close proximity didn't work in that situation, that it could be adjusted.
Because it seems to me, if I had somebody putting one right next to my house, I'd want it to be 8 feet.
The same as.
I don't see why, if the house has to be 8 feet away, then I'd want the guest quarters to have to be 8 feet away if it was my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think I would encourage if you're thinking about opening this up, that the guest quarters have some requirements from a safety perspective. Because I know even with, I'm not a fan of the short-term rentals, and some of you already know that, but I think if we have those and we start opening up guest quarters for that concept too, then we should have an inspection process. And there should be a minimum safety requirement so that there's egresses and ability you know, that, like a lot of cities do, when homes are sold, inspectors go in and they have to bring them up to code before they sell them and that kind of thing. I just think that we're opening up a lot of opportunities for people to just literally start throwing sheds. Because I think it's 2 auxiliary buildings are allowed on a piece of property. Is that right? And are there limitations as to the number of square feet that it can take of the entire yard?
Yes, so we currently have a couple of things that would come into play there. So there is a limitation on the number of accessory dwelling or accessory buildings that can be on a property, and that is 2. And the total square footage of those accessory buildings cannot exceed 75% of the principal building. So if you have a 1,000 square foot home, you can have up to 750 square feet of accessory structures, not to exceed more than 2 buildings. We do have a caveat in there that even if your home is smaller, you're always allowed at least up to 576 square feet of accessory buildings, which is essentially a 2-car garage. So even if you only had a 700 square foot home, you could still have a 2-car garage on your property.
But there's not a requirement, Jeff, that says if you have a 1/4 acre property, you can't cover more than X% of that 1/4 acre property between the primary and the 2
Yep.
auxiliary.
We have language addressing that also. I'd have to look at the section of the code. It's on page 52 of the zoning code. And it, in the single family residential districts, it can be either 35 or 40% rough, give or take. And I forgot what the triggering effect is for when it's one or the other. But there is a limitation that you cannot cover more than that amount of your property.
But if it's 2-story, only the first story comes into play.
So we're looking at
Footprint.
Yeah.
Of the main.
We're looking at the footprint. The other thing that could potentially come into, or that's part of this discussion is a number of years ago, we did modify the code for properties over a certain acreage size. So some of the larger properties, and we only have a dozen or so of those in town, they can come in for a special land use approval to have greater than that 75% rule or more than 2 accessory buildings if they meet certain requirements and apply for special land use. And that language, I think, was added about 4 years ago-ish. So that's just another part of the conversation, I think. But we've got page 52 pulled up here. Lot coverage for lots equal to or greater than the minimum lot area by district. Your maximum lot coverage is 35% in most of the districts, 40% in R1c, which is where we typically have the smallest size lots, and 25% in R1e, which is typically the largest lots. So that's limiting the percentage of the lot that you can cover with. In the residential zoning districts, that's for the footprint of structures. Thanks for pulling that out.
Thank you very much for those comments and questions. Really appreciate it. And Jeff has explained to me that if we wanted to consider some of these changes tonight, the way that this would go is we would instruct staff to put together some proposed wording based on the guidelines that we give them. And then they would bring that back at the next meeting and we would take another look at that. We'd reflect on it, for the month, and then decide if we wanted to go forward and have a public hearing on it. And that would be at the meeting following that. So in this case, here we are in August. So in the September meeting, staff would bring back some proposed wording. We'd look at it, decide if it warranted more discussion and a public hearing. And that would be scheduled for the October meeting.
Is this something that, if we go through this whole process and make a determination, is it our decision to make the change in the zoning ordinance, or does it go to city council?
Great question.
We would make a recommendation to city council.
Did I miss the comment section?
Yes.
Can I say something?
All right, jump in real fast.
Was gonna say that, when you're building a house and you have to have an occupancy permit. Maybe that should be language in there that if you're gonna have an auxiliary building be utilized, that there should be an occupancy permit from the county. I just thought I'd throw that out there as something to consider.
Great.
we did get 2 pieces of correspondence via email that touch on both short-term rental and this. So I'll just point those out. We got one from a property owner in town who, I believe that he owns a property that has a guest house on it and would like to be able to rent it out and use it for short-term rental. And that's, you all have that document that I've given out, and it's quite lengthy. It's a good read. And he specifies some ideas of how that could be controlled so it doesn't get out of hand. We also have an email from another lady who has touched on guest quarters and on short-term rentals. And one of the things I want to point out, and this was also a comment that George Pete made at our last planning commission in talking about a situation where a property owner was short-term renting their home, but then residing in their guest quarters. And he questioned whether that was acceptable or not. And then that was brought up in this email as well. And I did pull up a section of our zoning code, and I'll read it to you real quick. It's short. In certain districts, so R1b, R1c and whatnot, guest quarters can be occupied only by friends or relatives of the owner of the principal building on the lot. And such occupancy shall not exceed 21 consecutive days. And any such person upon terminating occupancy of guest quarters shall not be permitted to reoccupy the guest quarters for a period of 1 month. So I talked that over with Victor. I think there's potentially 2 ways that this could be looked at, because we talk about occupancy of guest quarters in another section also, but we add on in R1a and R1e that it can be occupied by domestic employees. I think that if you strictly look at the wording of this, and if we wanted to look into it, we could ask the zoning board of appeals to provide us an interpretation. But I think the strict wording of this, you could interpret this that the property owner cannot occupy their guest quarters. If you look at it and say that they can occupy their guest quarters, it still then says that they can't occupy it for a longer period than 21 days where they would have to leave. So I also feel that it's important to look at it from that perspective. Because if we say that they can occupy their guest quarters long-term, we have essentially found a way for property owners to bypass the ability to have a second dwelling unit where they permanently rent out their main home and then live permanently in their guest quarters. And we would be creating duplex scenarios throughout our district anyway. So I think our stance right now should be and is that it's not permissible for a property owner to live in their guest quarters and rent out their main home. And if anybody has locations where that's happening, they should let us know and we can look into it. Unless, of course, we choose to change those rules at this meeting or a future meeting and modify the zoning code.
All right, well, that's an interesting one. So you can't, it's like you can't go live in your guest room in your own house, you know, it's property that you own. But anyway,
Well,
so we'll probably circle around it.
That's more of what you're talking about, correct?
I think the situation that was brought up at a previous meeting and brought up in this document here was that they were short-term renting the main home and then staying in their guest quarters while it was being rented out. And I think that the language that we have in the code says that that's not permitted.
Current.
The current
You can
code.
go live in that barn there at your house if you want.
If you go up there and fall asleep on the couch, are you breaking the law? Or
I mean,
it seems pretty crazy to me, but anyway, so.
you're not breaking the
to
law
re-
until you charge someone to
Yeah,
live in your
you
other
start
home.
letting them-
And
Yeah, okay.
that's when you're breaking the law. You can go in your guest room all you
Yeah.
want. It's when you start,
Man cave, over there.
right,
All
it's
right.
when you start charging people to use your kitchen.
Well, to bring this, to wrap this up.
Or when you have your kids up and you let them stay in the big house, you're breaking the law.
Oh.
No.
Yes.
No, because I wouldn't charge my kids.
Charging them.
Or not, yeah. It's the charging, right?
I think it's the situation changes when you start talking about rent. If I have family and friends up and we're utilizing guest quarters for those purposes, whether I'm in the main house or the guest house and it's my property, I think we're fine there. It's when we start renting a portion of the property, that's, I think, where the issue becomes. Because now we're not treating that property as a whole. If I'm own a property and I rent that property out, whether it's for short-term rental for 3 days or for the year, I think we should be talking about that it's currently permissible to rent out the property, meaning the main home and the guest home. It's when you start separating those uses into two separate things, where I'm renting out one and not the other, or I'm renting out both, one to this party and one to this party. Now we're talking about separate uses and we're treating them as separate dwelling units. And that's where we've gotten into a situation where we're violating the current zoning code, in my opinion.
John, you wanted to make a comment?
I'm trying to filter all this conversation out. Because I'll be working with Jeff on any ordinance rewrite. The way I understand it is a guest house doesn't need to have a kitchen or a bathroom. Okay, and it's only gonna be used for 21 days and it's primarily for family and friends. So if I have the grandkids or the kids stay in the guest house, they can run over and use the facilities in the main house. Now, if you're going to divide that and say that it can be rented on a long-term basis to a non-family or none of your friends, to a third party, then the guest house now becomes an accessory dwelling. And an accessory dwelling is a dwelling unit, which means it should have a bath, a kitchen, and those facilities. So really what you're talking about is evolving the guest house concept into accessory dwelling units. So it's really an abandonment of the guest house provisions. And now you're into creating an ordinance that is going to manage how you're going to regulate accessory dwelling units, which is obviously a smaller dwelling on the same lot,
Yeah.
like Jeff said, that can be rented independently from the main house. Sewer,
I agree.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay.
that's correct.
So we're really not talking about guest houses anymore. Now we're talking about accessory dwelling units.
Our wording was guest quarters, so
Guest
guest
quarters.
quarters. Which would be part of a accessory building generally, like always, I guess.
How would you rent a guest quarters to somebody on a long-term basis
Yeah.
without providing them with a kitchen or a bath
But I
facility?
don't think we've ever said anything about kitchen or bath facilities. That's it's always been our opaque description about it could be habitable. You know, and then it's up to people to furnish it the way that makes sense for them or that, you know.
But if you're gonna do it on a long-term basis, you're not gonna have people that live there that are running around trying to figure out where they can find a bathroom
Sure.
or get something to eat. So I mean, you're really talking about evolving into an accessory dwelling unit, which means that the building, either it's built above a garage or a carriage house or independently, has to meet the building code and has to be constructed as a dwelling.
Yeah.
And that.
And it does today.
And I think that's where, we use the building code to our advantage to make sure that things are done correctly, for like egress and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That happens automatically, but, the building code has definitions for.
Yeah.
So we can just piggyback on that.
Okay.
So I just wanted to be clear because, we can put together an ordinance
Yeah.
amendment that talks about the accessory dwelling units and what all those requirements would be.
That's a bigger,
But listening to the
Bigger bite.
conversation, that's where you basically evolved. That was, the result of this conversation is you're really talking about 80 years.
my thought was, is there a quick fix that we can make that would help people in the community? Maybe open up a couple more rentals, before winter time when folks need a place to live. Without going down the track of, a whole set of ordinances on accessory dwelling units, which, we're eager to get to, but could be a bigger bite.
Well, you kind of stepped up to the cliff.
Okay.
Now you got to jump off one way or the other.
I think, I understand your desire to get something done sooner rather than later, but I think the evolution is correct, and this is where we want to go, we should just do it the right way. Otherwise, we're just creating more headaches down the road and adding another series of procedures that we gotta go
Yeah.
through.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we were sort of trying to clear up and make things clearer and simpler, I think, with the new ordinance.
Okay.
So I think we're all I think there's solid support for this. But I think John's correct. I think that's the path we're on. Is that the path we want to be on? And I don't know if we how much work we do on that without getting maybe some feedback from city council. I don't want to put a whole ton of work in this and have them go, you guys are nuts, we're not gonna do this.
Well, that's a good point.
I think the other thing, if we draft it, I want to be cognizant of the historical development patterns here. That you don't want to end up with an ADU that looks completely out of context.
That's right.
So, you want to have some standards in there that kind of keeps that neighborhood and that cohesion and that fabric together. So I kind of agree with Mark, if you're gonna do it, let's make sure we have some appropriate standards to evaluate the request by.
We do have some language in the code that starts that discussion. We've required that accessory buildings cannot exceed the height of the principal building. We also have language that they should be of similar style, character, design of the principal building. So we've touched on that some to start with. We certainly have aspects, I think, that we can pull from our current code and add to. I think also it would be worth looking at some other communities. This is a topic that Petoskey has just recently tackled. They've expanded their use of accessory dwelling units and are permitting them. I think they've created a limit that they can't add more than 10 per year. I think they removed the special land use requirement.
Yes.
So they've made some changes, and I talked to their planner and zoner about it a little bit. I think it's been received with mixed blessings. So I think it would be, good to look at what they've done and what issues they maybe have had in this process to see how we can benefit from their experience.
Great, okay. Public comment is closed. I gotta we gotta wrap this part up because we got some more work to do. So planning commissioners, I'd like to ask you, what's your appetite for attacking this thing now? If my thought is if we wait till we get to it through the review of the zoning code, it's gonna be a year plus. And then maybe okay? Make it
Mr. Chairman, we could have a draft for you for the next meeting.
well, that changes things.
I think we have sufficient information to put something together for you.
I
We
can
can at least
see
talk
a
about
really clear path on this.
All right,
So I think we can direct staff to
Okay.
do that. I support that, see where we can go with it.
support.
Man, I think I see where John's going.
great. I was thinking it was a bigger.
Well, look at it.
So Jeff, what do we need from planning commission to ask you to put together some draft
I
language?
think just a consensus. You're just kind of asking us to put together some information. We'll bring back a draft copy of it at the September meeting. At that meeting, we'll give it a review. At that point in time, we can either modify the wording or get direction from you to further modify it based on your input if you don't like it. If the modification is minimal, then we can just set a public hearing then for the October meeting to have a good review. And at that October meeting, based on public input, we would either go back and redraft if we get negative comments, or if people are generally in favor of it, then planning commission could request city council to take action and approve it.
Okay, so
Excuse me.
go ahead.
I'm just wondering, should the council be notified that we're looking at this? Or it's you might get a vote at the council that says, no way, and then why waste time on it? So as you're developing this, maybe the first draft,
Yeah.
we show it to the council way early in the process so that they can,
Okay.
if they're dead set against it, then there'd be no point in going.
Great.
I
Does
concur.
council meets on September 5th? Is that the next meeting?
I thought we met on the
No,
19th.
Labor Day must be wrong.
It's 19.
Oh, okay.
Labor Day.
Do we have a planning commission meeting before or after?
Before, right?
The September meeting of the planning commission would be on the 15th, so we would be meeting before.
So we could look
We
at
could-
it and
Yeah, we can
then,
look at it and give the council
yeah,
an idea of what we're thinking.
Yeah, and what our rationale
Yeah,
and all this kind of stuff. Now, John, would you be able to, in that amount of time, look at the existing code and sort of identify areas that would be struck out or edited.
Yes.
Because I think that's key to really demonstrate how something like this can clean up a lot of.
It's mostly in one area, so it shouldn't be too difficult.
I'll rely
That'd
on
be great.
Jeff.
We can work on this together, for
I'm
sure.
still working my way through the existing.
Okay,
I've
great.
been doing it for years, yeah.
It sounds to me like we have consensus on the planning commission, asking you to put together some proposed wording that we
We'll
can
do
take
it.
a look at the next meeting.
Just a comment about council, I mean, I like Al's idea, giving, it's a big topic.
Yep.
And I think, I'm excited that it's on the table, because I think there's a real opportunity here, like you pointed out, Bill. When you have something ready to send to planning commission, council could be copied on that. With, I mean, you're on the planning commission, it could be, the topic could be introduced and say, this is what the planning commission is thinking about. So that those lines, if not, if you do it sequentially and you add up all the meetings that have to happen for it to be discussed and public meeting and all that, we're just gonna draw out the process.
Great. Okay, we'll take the earliest opportunity to give a preview to council.
Suggestion.
All right, that closes out that topic. Let's move on to our continuation from last meeting, which is short-term rentals. And the concept of potentially limiting the number of short-term rentals in single-family residential zoning districts. That creates a question of how a limited number of licenses will be allocated, and the team has put together a recommendation on that. Jeff, do you want to tell us what you guys came up with?
Yeah, the first thing I wanted to do, and I'm not sure if it made it into the packet, I didn't finalize the packet, so I'm not sure, but I know that John gave us a breakdown of where all of the short-term rentals are by zoning district. And we have a nice map over there that I believe is part of the packet. Oh, yep, it did make it.
Yeah,
All right.
it did make.
So we have, and I'm just gonna read through this real quick. We have a grand total as of the time of this, we had 81 short-term rentals. 39 of those were in the R1c zoning district, which is our largest zoning district. And we have I should keep on my duties and let me pull this map up on here so that everybody can see what I'm talking about. Maybe.
Oh, it's stuck.
Yeah, it just froze on me. I apologize. We have a hard copy of it over here and the packet is on the website. The R1c zoning district is our largest zoning district. It is a single family district. So 39 of them are in that. 8 are in the R1b. So on. We have 9 within the central business district. We have 4 in B1. We have some then in RM, which is our residential multiple. There's 7 more there. I don't remember what the exact breakdown is between the two types here. So our marching orders, we were told to put together a process for what it would look like if we allowed under a license as we currently are, an unlimited number within the central business district and other areas, but limited the number of short-term rentals within the single family zoning districts to a specific number of 40, 45, something like that. So I think our main focus was how would we determine how we choose how many or who gets the licenses and who doesn't. John put together a great little scoring sheet essentially that we have here. We basically took 7 or 8 items. We identified different categories within that to create a point system or a scoring system. As an example, the first one, you said that residency was important, the location of the property owner to the property and their ability to manage that. So the first factor here, there's a possibility of 10 points. If the property owner lives and resides within the city of Harbor Springs, 10 points. If they live within Emmett County, 5 points. If they live within the state of Michigan, 1 point. If they live out of the state, 0 points. Same thing, we took into consideration, have there been complaints on record regarding the property? Have there been any, verified complaints, suspension hearings, or revocation of license with that property. That affects the number of points that they can get. We also added in something here regarding annual inspections. I think we're still working on how that would work, whether that would be something that maybe the building department could participate with us, or whether we go with outside, we get a list of approved home inspectors that might participate with us on doing this. And the idea there is we've got a couple of these categories here, whether there's smoke detectors in the building, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, noting in that inspection how many they have and where they are. We've assigned some point totals on here for that, and the ability to monitor that. So what we did is we basically came up with this system. There's the ability to get 100 points. I think we set the short-term rental license holder was required to have at least 75 points in order to qualify for a license. I think by doing this, we do a couple things. This process could work something like we set a specific date, and on that date is when we would choose, let's say we set the total number at 40, and let's say we have on that date 60 applicants. The 40 would go to, I think, the applicants that have the highest number of points. Applicants that have met the most number of requirements on here would be the first ones chosen. I think the key here is that we have a defendable method for allotting out the short-term rental licenses, so that if someone challenges the fact that they had a short-term rental license last year, but for whatever reason they are not awarded a short-term rental license this year, that we have a defendable reason that if we end up in court with them because they're challenging our decision to not issue them a license, that we have something credible that we can go by on how we made our decision to not give that person a license. It also incentivizes people to get their applications in by a certain time, so that we are less likely to end up in situations where halfway through the year we're still doling out licenses. Maybe by March 15th or whatever we set for a deadline, we only have 20 or 30 applicants and there's still 10 or 20 licenses available, then they might trickle in, and it's on a first come, first served basis if people have met the minimum requirement for points. Just kind of an idea that we put together on how that might work. John, do you have any other thoughts on?
No, I thought you did a kind of good comprehensive review.
That's kind of what we came up with as a method of how we could work some type of a process for limiting the number of licenses and how that would work. I think we have a license on file, we have a process on file. We could probably amend and adjust filing fees adjacent with this. If we're limiting the number of licenses, the cost to enforce is not decreased. So I think we might need to increase the cost that we're charging for this. I think there's a number of things that come into play here as well. We would probably have to do a two-stage fee system. There would probably be one fee that would be assigned at the time when they submit the license. And then if they're approved, there would be the follow-up fee for the rest of the fee. I do feel that implementing this might be a measurable increase in the cost to enforce. If we're limiting this to a number that's lower than the number of short-term licenses that we have out there, I think there's a strong likelihood from looking at other communities that to enforce this, it means going to court to tell someone to stop in some cases. And so there will be those added legal expenses of doing that. And that's something that we should take into consideration, not to say that should stop us from trying to implement something, but we have to recognize that there is that higher level involvement of city staff, and the time required of city staff, and the cost that may be absorbed from making those decisions to enforce that. Just as follow-up thoughts. So with that, do you have any questions, comments, gestures?
Does 491 State Street have a license? They're not on the chart.
They do have a license,
Okay.
yes.
They've been obnoxious last couple of weeks.
And you call the cops, right? Because we have ordinances.
Pardon?
You call the cops, right? Because we have ordinances.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, let's keep it focused on the facts here. In terms of the numbers, Sue Winter, short-term rental aficionado, has scoured the current listings, and she thinks there are maybe five or six more that aren't reflected on our list. So the number of short-term rentals in the single-family zoning districts we're talking about could be anywhere between 53 and 58 today.
What percentage of the buildings are short-term rentals that you might identify?
Let's hold on to that question just for a sec. Let's get the commissioners grounded, and then we'll open up for questions and comments, and we'll attack all those things. So between 53 and 58 in the zoning districts we're talking about, we're considering a limit of 40 or 45. So some people are going to not get a license again. So that's by definition. All right, commissioners, any other thoughts before we open it to the public?
Well, I think this is done really nicely. I mean, this is a nice concrete piece of work, that can be used very effectively. One thing I suggest that would make it, I also have to say, I have a short-term rental. So I don't intend on voting on any of this stuff, even though mine is in a B1 district. I would like to continue to have comments. Great, is that okay?
Please.
Okay. Thanks. But as far as the one thing that just jumps out at me is the annual inspection. Because if you bring in different building inspectors, the county can't take that on, county's too dang busy. So you bring in like private guys, it's gonna cost more money, and there are all sorts of various standards out there. Some guys are good, some guys aren't so good. That's a real wild card. So I would suggest instead of having annual inspections, have annual verifications, where you look specifically at the items that you have down here that you're gonna check and make sure they have that.
I think our thought on that was that we might create some type of a document that would have our request of what we would like them to check. And then we might develop, through talking with a few home inspectors in the area, preferred list. And then that property owner could reach out to one of the people on that list and say, I've applied for an application for short-term rental in Harbor Springs. I need you to visit the properties.
Standards.
And-
So you're
and
thinking
verify
more
these standards.
life safety issues primarily.
Yes.
And also confirm the number of bedrooms and all that kind of stuff. So it's
Right.
confirmation, verification of life safety. Okay, because if you start getting into the height of that riser is an 8 inch too tall.
No.
Or you
Some guys
don't
would
have
do-
a balcony
I
or.
don't think we want to get into that, but
Yeah,
like,
that's
for
my
instance, they could verify, on this point sheet, smoke detectors. They can get 10 points if they have a smoke detector, one per floor, plus one in the kitchen, bedrooms, and furnace room.
I went through this on mine and I came up with 85.
Did you? So you qualify that.
Well, but I wouldn't, if this were across the board, this isn't one size fit all. But for the single family residential, it works, but you can't apply it to different zoning districts because, they're set up completely differently. But for single family, this makes a lot of sense.
And I think that's what this was designed for,
Yeah.
because we knew it wasn't going to apply to the central business district in B1.
Yeah.
It was going to be applying to properties within the
Yeah,
single family
where the
districts.
issues are.
And those guys are gonna stay unlimited, right?
Well, so I still think that they should file a short-term rental license and still submit an application so that we can have that information on file. And if we have any issues, we can still reach out and contact them as quickly as possible. I think that's one of the goals, should be the ability to identify a concern and a problem as quickly as possible and reach out to that property owner to address that in a timely manner.
Yeah, it also helps with funding.
It helps with money, yes.
Yeah.
Then the follow-up is in single family, where we want to have the limitation to have a defensible method for determining winners and losers, right? Because that's really what we're doing is deciding if there's 60 people that want to do this and we're going to limit it to 40, 30% of them don't get to do what they want to do. So being able to have and also it to some extent takes away some of the control from me as a person for me to be deciding, well, I like this person more than this person, or the perception that I like this person more than this person. And I can say, here's how it is, right? It's going to be determined based on this. We're going to pick the first 40 that have the highest number of points on this date, and whatever's left after that gets divvied up however. And it makes it very clear to the applicant what they can do to have the highest chance of success in getting a short-term rental license and keeping a short-term rental license. The only other thing that I think that we haven't addressed in this is if we want to do anything that would give any preference to people that had one last year and it went well and they want to continue to do it again this year. If that's something that's important to us to identify or not.
And I think the other part of the way we set the program up was recognizing that short-term rentals are basically a business, and that the administration of the program needs to be self-funded by the short-term rental applications, not by the city. So it's got to be a self-sustaining program.
We're busy building bureaucracy here.
Oh,
That's what we're doing.
no, what we're
More and
doing, what we're
more
doing.
levels of bureaucracy.
What we're doing is we're trying to set a program up. If the community wants to set a limit on the number of short-term rentals in a residential area, you have to have a process in place that is not discretionary, but based on a way of determining who gets the license or not. And the way to do that is through a point scale. And it's really up to the person that has the short-term rental.
You can't use the word community unless you take this to a vote. This is not the community.
I use the word community in a generic sense based on public policy. If the public policy is to establish a limitation on the number of short-term rentals in a residential area, you have to have a methodology that's fair to everybody that gives them the opportunity to get one of those licenses without being arbitrary. And the way to do that is to set up a point system that somebody has in advance with their application, and they can go through and determine, just like Mark did, how many points he would have in order to be considered for a license. And then the other part of this with the inspection services is the fact that we're ensuring that the quality of the properties are maintained to a certain standard where you're not going to see degradation occur within a neighborhood that could have a negative impact on the adjacent property owners. Because it's not fair to me if I don't have a short-term rental and he does, and he lets his property goes down, which then impacts my value of my property. That's not fair either. So we have to evaluate this. Short-term rentals are a income-producing business, and they have to be basically managed that way. They have to be managed in a way that's not on the back of the taxpayers. It's not fair to the residents of the community that pay taxes to have to underwrite a short-term rental program. It should be self-sustaining. And that's how this is set up.
I think the community is, even though it's obviously it hasn't gone to a vote of the people. We've discussed short-term rental at a number of planning commission meetings, and we've had a number of public forums. We had that large one last summer where 70 to 100 and some people showed up. So the community has had a lot of opportunity to provide input, and I think that we've gotten a lot of input from the community, indicating that they would like a high level of enforcement and monitoring. And it's been discussed at city council as well. I know city council has been hesitant in some regards to limit short-term rental, but I think that this is a way to do so and to still be fair as possible to everybody. I don't think the community would like it if we got rid of short-term rentals. I think too many people in the community really like having short-term rentals in the area. We don't have hotels, we don't have motels. I think a lot of people utilize it in the summer when they have their friends and family come and visit them. They have short-term rentals nearby them that they then rent. So I think if we got rid of it, people might be upset. We've had short-term rentals in one shape or form. I think probably for a long time. Short-term rental is the new name for it, but I think it's been going on for quite some time.
All right, would
I
you,
would,
go ahead.
just one
Michael.
moment. I would think that it'd be my hope that by doing this actually cleans up and eliminates bureaucracy. Because right now they gotta deal with it and it's in a gray area. This way it's more black and white. I think it would be more efficient. Because that would be my hope, that this is why this is happening. The second thing is, you mentioned that if you we have possibly two application fee processes. One is for the original application and another fee for, the enforcement of this or something.
Once they're picked.
How does that work when you have, obviously I have one, will all short-term rental owners have to pay the same fee? Or will there be a staggered type system?
I think what we discussed when we were coming up with this idea, because, let's say that we receive 100 applications and we then have to go through and manage, even the people that aren't chosen, there's still a process. We have to verify the information. We have to score that out.
Agreed.
So I think the idea was everybody that's applying, there would be an application fee of some sort, right? Probably a smaller amount. But then once we go through all of those applications and pick the licenses that we're going to issue, there would then be a license fee for the people that are approved. So I'll throw out numbers. I don't know if they make sense or not, but let's say the application cost might be $100 for the initial thing. We would then go through and score all of those and then determine who gets the licenses. And then once we contact people and say you're approved for a license, but that license fee is going to be $400. That way everybody that's participating in that short-term rental process is paying for that service.
Well, but that's just in a single family.
That's, yes, in the single family, we would, for the other properties, we would have our short-term rental license fee. There would just be, we would skip that initial application.
Oh, I see.
They would still be, filing the license application, but they would skip this application process with the point scoring and the other excessive things that are needed here for that.
So it'd be like this somewhat two-tiered system.
Right.
Yeah, which makes sense.
And that way, if somebody submits and they're not chosen, they're not out all of that money. There's some money that they've paid, but
Work is being done, so it has to be covered.
They fill out their application, you grade them, they don't get their license. How do you stop them from renting out that property as an STR?
unfortunately, our only recourse is we have to take them to court. And that's where things could potentially get expensive. Petoskey has dealt with that. They, in their residential neighborhoods where they've limited it, there is that cost of enforcement of, going to court, and we have to be able to fully defend and say and prove that they're renting it, which can be difficult, because you have to have, copies of listings or something at that time. We have to have that background evidence to submit and say, we told them they couldn't rent and they did it anyway. And you have to go to court. The court then initially could say, okay, well, they can't do it anymore. You may have to go back to court again and say you told them not to and they're still doing it, where then they may be issued a motion to compel or something like that. It can be a lengthy process to try and force somebody, and then it's up to the courts to determine how they're going to make that person stop.
Okay. I went to that meeting last summer when everybody came, and a good 80% of the people that were there did not want short-term rentals in the residential neighborhoods. The only people that wanted it were the people that had short-term rentals. Now, we've been talking how to come up with more living space for people in Harbor Springs by changing our ruling on accessory dwellings. We've got 60 buildings here in the residential areas that could be rented out long-term to people. It just, the main thrust of people that were against short-term rentals was that this is a business and it doesn't belong in a residential district. So why do we keep trying to figure out ways to limit them and put them in there when the basic fact is, as John said, this is a business and this is a residential district and it doesn't need a business in there. So
I think the blunt answer is city council is gonna be the one to decide what happens in the city code. And when we previously went to city council to request just a moratorium on the issue of licenses, they were not in favor of that.
yes, and how many have short-term rentals?
They did not participate in the
To
vote,
recuse themselves.
to recuse
So
themselves.
you can't get a vote.
They had a vote.
Give it to,
They voted.
if they have short-term rentals, they can vote.
They did, the members of city council that had short-term rentals recused themselves from voting. The other members of city council voted to not to put a moratorium in place. Is that correct, John, Al?
Yeah.
Does that
That's
sound?
correct.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct.
I want to make sure I'm not.
To recuse themselves, 3 voted.
And so I think if you can't get city council to vote to put a moratorium in place to stop issuance of new licenses, do you think that they're going to be in favor of saying we're not going to issue any licenses at all?
I would be careful trying to speculate.
Well, okay, I shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think our role in planning commission is we, study an issue, we've got the time to really roll it around and look at it from all sides, tee it up in a way that we think is in the best interest of the community and give it to council. And then they can do with it what they think is best. But it's our job to really package this thing up with all the advantages and disadvantages and make the best recommendation that we can.
And that was in fact what council voted on, was to not just moratorium, but let the planning commission proceed with plans that had been talked about last year, to delve into it with detail and come back with a reasonable proposal based on public meetings, feedback, and research.
Yeah,
So
here
that's
we
what
are,
we should do.
trying to square that up right now. So what would you think about hearing from some members of the community on this topic? In favor of that at all?
We've been there, we've done it.
I think there's some folks in the audience that might want to comment. Yes, there's one now.
My impression is that you're kind of creating a can of worms with your point system. And you're going to expose yourself, like you said, to going to court. I don't think that anybody today that has a short-term rental license should lose it. That you operated that way, you made your investment, for the city to come in and just take that away and say, no, you no longer can have that. I think that's wrong. I think you should lose your licenses over time. If you sell a property, the license doesn't transfer with it. If you don't renew it for a year, you lose your license. So if you have, I don't know, whatever it is, 50 rentals, you set your number of licenses at 40. Over time, that's it. If it goes below 40, somebody could apply and get that license. But I don't know how much time city staff has, but to go through all these applications, all that, I think there's simple, easy ways to do it, where you're not judging everybody, and you're not taking something away from people that they already have. I think that the goal is to stop this from happening. It's making prices of houses go up for people from out of town, buy them, simply put them into the rental market. And it seems like over time, less and less houses are available for people who want to live here. And it makes them unaffordable. I think there should be fees to having a license. Maybe it's $250 a year, whatever it is. But in most places, you also have to have a commercial license because it's a business, like you said. Maybe if you have a commercial license on your property taxes also go up. And at the same time, you want to discourage short-term rentals. You want to encourage infill in a way and having more accessory dwelling units. We need people to live here. And you need to stop what's going on. That's all, that's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen.
Yeah, Kristen McDonald, on the zoning board. I completely agree with Paul. I've been thinking about this since the last time I was here and how to make this fair. I think that's exactly how you do it. You just start phasing them out. As a realtor, very uncomfortable to sell something to someone and they think they can do this, and then the rug is pulled out from underneath them. So I agree with that. I also think that incentivizing long-term rentals, what can we do to make that more appealing, and what can we do to make the short-term rentals less appealing? And maybe it's not $400, maybe it's $2,000. They're making a lot of money with their business of short-term rentals. Maybe that's, $400 is nothing. Maybe they need to feel that as well as the inspections you guys are talking about. And then how do we incentivize people, landlords coming back into the community, and how do we make it more appealing for them to actually take a huge price reduction in their monthly, nut. And so we got to make it so that the landlords are winning again, and that the short-term rentals, are kind of, feeling the pinch a little bit financially, maybe.
I'd like to make another comment. I'm not sure about these inspections. If you look through any of the rental magazines and you look at these places, they're pretty beautiful. I don't think there's rundown apartments that are being rented. They're $8,000 a month or $8,000 a week.
I don't think we were looking at, the inspection proposal was for quality. I think it was more about smoke detectors and fire extinguishers.
Isn't that a way of discouraging? Isn't it another way of just going in and making things more difficult? I also don't know about this zoning. Why is it different from one zone to the other? Why aren't we treating the city all the same? If you have the business with no constriction on it, then all the rentals are just going to move to there.
Right.
That's what will happen. The city needs to be treated with broad brush across all of it.
Other,
John Wayman, I've got a couple of questions first before I give you my opinion. In the residential area, what percentage are we now dealing with that are used for short-term rentals?
Approximate numbers. We have about 85 short-term rentals, Bill
In
mentioned.
the residential area.
No, that's total.
I'm only talking about, I bought a house in a residential area, so I want to know in my residential area, what percentage is really a
John, what did we say? Bill, did you
so
comment?
we got between 53 and 58 in residential areas.
Let's assume 58. There's approximately 1,150 residential properties in the city of Harbor Springs.
But that's in all zoning districts.
That's in
residential.
Those are residential properties within the city of Harbor Springs, not to be confused with zoning districts. They're properties that are classed residentially, so residential homes. There's 1,150 of those. If there's 58 short-term rentals in those areas, that's approximately 5% of the properties. If you look at it as a whole, there's 85 units or 85 short-term rentals. There's approximately 1,200 in some properties. It's about 7% of the total properties of the city of Harbor Springs, including all classes.
And when you're talking about short-term rental, what term are you talking about? A weekend, a week, a month? What is a short-term rental by definition?
So the language that we've chosen to use is language that has been proposed at the state level. So we're trying to make sure that we're consistent with what's been proposed there. The proposal is that short-term rental is defined as any rental of property for 30 days or less. I think the phrase non-reoccurring is included in that.
So you can rent a place for a weekend. is what you're talking about. If you're not limiting it to at least a month, 2 weeks or a month or something like that.
We previously had, so to provide a little bit of background, in 2015, when I first started here, we did not address short-term rentals at all. The only language that we had in the code was that you could not rent your property for less than 7 days. So if somebody rented their property for 7 days or more, that was a by right use of their property and they needed no special permissions to do so. If it was for less than that a period of time, then our recourse was to say you're violating the zoning code and you can't do that. That was very difficult to enforce. One of the issues that we had was essentially, we would contact somebody that rented their property out for 3 days and say, you can't do that, it has to be for 7 days or more. So then what we would find is that their listing would be for 7 days or more. And someone would rent the property for 7 days, but then only stay there for 3. So technically they're in compliance with the language, but it wasn't really working. It was very difficult to enforce and at that time, we really weren't receiving very many complaints about the duration of stay. So because of the difficulty to enforce the time duration and the lack of complaints regarding the duration of stay, most of the complaints were about other issues that could happen, whether it was 3 days or 10 days, was noise, parking, garbage, things like that. And that's what most communities face. So when we created our licensing process, which I think around 2018 or 19, we removed the time limitation and expanded the duration to include up to 30 days would be viewed as short-term rental and require the license process.
Is there a distinction between owner occupied and a business? Where somebody buys a building, it's not owner occupied, they depreciate it, they identify it in their tax returns as a business? No.
Not in our license, I don't think so.
If I may, I'm John Wayman from 43 East 3rd Street. We bought our place 25 years ago and loaned it to friends, didn't rent it. Then we moved up here and our residents in a residential area. What I haven't heard tonight is people talking about as a priority, it's a residential area. I think to some of the points that are being made here, as distinguished from a business area that is also residential. And I see that there seems to be some deference to people who are renting their places. Now I'm kind of conflicted because we have a daughter, for example, who's been thinking about trying to buy a house. She lives in Boston. She probably would qualify as an owner occupier, but she wants to rent it. She would think about renting it in order to defray expenses, and I know you know those issues. So as somebody that lives on East 3rd Street, I would ask the city council to make our community a gated community where there is no rentals at all. So my guess is that wouldn't work. Probably. Okay.
So Libby has to live somewhere else, not
Yeah.
on your street,
Yeah, that's right.
not on Third.
That's right. At least from my perspective, and I can give you an experience because the house next door to us became a business at one point in a residential area. It was not owner occupied, it was purchased as a business. And there were 2 owners. We had, I wish the chief was still here because we had a break-in across the street. And you, I think, may have already heard this from me. Associated with a rental that was more than 30 days. Supposedly an estranged husband who was supposedly concerned about what his wife was doing. We also had, we live butted up against the bluff. I had to call the owner of the building to report a fire going on in the back of his property during a red flag warning. And I don't know about you, but I don't think you'd want a bluff to be lit on fire. So my principal concern is we don't want a business next to us. I don't mind somebody who's an owner occupier loans out their place or maybe rents it a couple of times and so on. But I really do not want a business next to us. And what I'm hearing here is that it appears that we're going to allow businesses. And I've heard two things tonight, which I have objected to in the past. One is difficulty in enforcement. My background's law. It shouldn't dissuade you from pursuing aggressively issues associated with violation of ordinances. You can create ordinances that are require affidavits, are very strict in connection with violation of various terms that have defaults and so on and so forth. And yes, there may be an expense associated with enforcing them. But to the point I think made here, it should be self-funded. The city taxpayers generally shouldn't pay for it. I don't think it should be paid for by the people who get whatever licenses they're allowed. And the absence of complaints has come up a lot. I didn't complain that there was a break-in across the street because I had no idea what it was until I heard it from our chief. You may or may not have heard about it yourselves. If there's a problem in the city, when you call the city to deal with it and the police department and they don't answer, they say call 911. Well, none of what we're talking about in terms of difficulties are 911 qualified, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, we've been over that to a big degree in a number of the public meetings, and they say call 911.
If
What was
if
Kyle
you were here,
saying?
you would say no, call 911, because that's how they get notified.
That's true.
John, could you kind of wrap your comments with the policies or process that you would favor?
I believe that there cannot be a business per se in a residential area, period. Secondly, there should be an accommodation for an owner occupier, a real owner occupier. And thirdly, I think make a nuisance ordinance that's really tight and a license provision that makes a determination on a nuisance dispositive in terms of loss of the license. To the point I think made by a realtor friend, I don't think the focus on rentals is fair. I think it should be as a residential area and you take risk yourself if you want to rent it. And if you get in any difficulty, you lose the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for your letter too, that we included in last month's packet. That was very helpful.
I have a question, and that is if.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, Carol Winter, 141 Snyder's. If a homeowner claims it is homestead, can they rent out their property?
I have three answers for you. So yes, technically they can. Because this falls into another category. So when you talk about homestead, I'm assuming you're talking about the principal residence exemption. That if you claim it as your residence, you're exempt from up to 18 mills of school taxes. The state tax commission says that if you rent your home out for more than 14 days per year, and they picked that time frame because that's the time frame when you have to then report that as income on your income taxes, is my understanding. That you do not qualify for a principal residence exemption anymore. And they've instructed assessors to rescind principal residence exemptions or deny them at that point in time. However, the Michigan Tax Tribunal, which is the governing body that you would appeal any decision that I as the assessor make, they have made decisions that basically say as long as the owner has an intent to return to the property, that they can continue to use it as their principal residence exemption and claim the exemption. So there's two organizations at the state level that have different ideas on what can be done.
Because that's when Paul mentioned the commercial license, that's what made me think about that. And then your point about, I live in R1, I think it is, and I don't want them in my neighborhood either. I have them, a lot of them in my neighborhood. but-
There's a lot of businesses that are in single-family residential districts. They're just to varying degrees. Long-term rental of property is commercial use of property, right? The various states, I think, have made Court of Appeals rulings on short-term and long-term rental that it is commercial use of property. And that's what enables municipalities to have various rules and regulations that govern short-term rental and or long-term rental at this time. We allow home occupations in homes. It's just a matter of to what degree these different uses of property that aren't normal single-family residential uses, to what degree they may negatively impact neighboring properties. And, and that's a good example of why we've identified that short-term rental has a higher potential to negatively impact neighboring properties. And these policies that we're looking at are ways to try and mitigate that negative impact. If that helps.
All right, any other comments? Okay, Paul, really fast.
Specifically, something short, I mean, typically, the answer lies somewhere in the middle to all things, and it is, the fact is, they're talking about having sailboat races here, they talk about increasing that. There is a need for some short-term rentals. The problem is, on the other side, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough housing for our workers. So somewhere, it's all up to you to figure that out. But most of the comments are all negative about it. And I just like to say that there is a positive part of it and a need that they do fulfill. And that this should be at a limit.
Thank you very much.
Just one question. I mean, obviously, to state the obvious, this is a complex issue. Businesses in residential areas and how many do we want, who wants what? But there are some, I think, serious legal issues that are addressed. And that is, if we move forward with this, what are the implications if in fact the planning commission suggests reducing the number of that? Has the city attorney weighed in at all on this?
I don't recall we've gotten Jim involved yet, no. We did a pretty in-depth survey of other Western Michigan resort towns, and many, there were 3 groups of solutions, and there are many towns that have implemented what we're looking at here tonight, and the variations that you all have suggested as well.
More specifically, and if the recommendations can be 40 or 45 in specific areas, that's fine. And I do agree with the logic of it's black and white. I'm more concerned about the city attorney's perspective on how we go from to. If we were talking about implementing.
Yes.
Starting with.
Yeah,
Great,
transition.
I get it. The transition,
right,
I think is worth, before any more work is done or any specifics. I think it behooves the planning commission to do that question.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners. Wow. Yeah, so would anyone like to say what they're feeling about the issue right now? Possible solutions?
Short-term rentals?
Yeah, short-term rentals.
That's it. Are we getting back to that?
We're on. Okay, yep, we got it.
I don't like them. I would not have them. And that's my position. So anything that moves that way will make me happy.
I'll counter that. Because, one of the benefits of short-term rentals is because we don't have hotels, we don't have motels in this town. It brings a lot of money into our community. Like just for my little one that I've got, the B1 district, people, they love going out to eat, they love shopping, they're playing golf, they're sailing, they're very active, they're spending money while they're here. I think business people in town would really notice if we stopped all short-term rentals. We would hear from them at some point. So that's, I think that's a positive thing that they do for us.
There are actually some people here that are under 75.
But Oh, we have all sorts of ages come through,
That's
young
what I mean.
families.
Young
I mean, it's-
people
it's-
actually come here
Yeah.
to stay for. a
Oh,
week
yeah,
or so,
absolutely.
And we
Yeah,
get to see.
and we
them.
have, retirees come through too, but we have families stay with us, but we can handle 4 people. And half the time, they're 2 parents and 2 kids. I know when kids are there, because I clean it, I can tell the difference between got kids in an apartment and don't have kids in an apartment. So, but but I think we do have to have some control, as we talked about. I think this is a really good first step. I love the matrix. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe there's some room for improvement on it or something, because once you see how the numbers shake out, maybe your weighting isn't quite right. Maybe 75 is too high or too low or whatever, but you find that out after 1 year's experience. So I'm in favor of, having this, take the next step, whatever that would be, whether it's to have a meeting and get it towards city council, just take the next step. A lot of work has gone into this. We were instructed to do this by the city council, so let's show them what we got. I think this is pretty strong.
Bob? Any thoughts at this point?
Not too much. I'm fiercely against more government involvement in everything. We're buried alive. More rules, more regulations, more this, more that, more inspectors, more bring the county into it. Because we can't take care of ourselves or won't. So we need to build this apparatus. I dare say a significant percentage of the people in this room are here because they came here at some time and did a short-term rental and said, this is a pretty nice place. Maybe we could live here. And now we're saying, we're here, close the door. I'm not that kind of a person. I don't want to be protected. I don't need to be protected. If I have an issue with the short-term renters across the street from my house, I'll go over and I'll knock on the door and we'll talk about it. It's that simple. I'm a big boy. I probably will not vote for any of this.
Rick, where do you come out at this point?
It's elitist. There, I said it.
When I fell in love with Harbor Springs, I came up here and I stayed at the Best West. And I don't think short-term rentals belong in residential districts. They're businesses. They don't belong there. I don't mind them in business districts. I don't mind them owner-operated operations, a real bed and breakfast where the owner is on site because they take care of it. People that buy it as a business live in Detroit. They've got a manager who's in Sheboygan. There's a problem. It doesn't get fixed and they don't take care of the property. They haven't done a thing to that house in the 3 years they've owned it. Except for last week, they put 6 potted plants out because the owners were coming to stay. But they don't mow their lawn. They don't take care of the property. An owner operator would do both. Okay. So that's the way I would prefer us to go in residential district, business districts. That's fine.
Okay.
Well, if we did this in a business district, we'd have 3 of them. Because that's how many places that are available in business districts. So why don't we just say, do away with this?
Okay.
So for every
We've got 28 in the non-single family.
Not being facetious.
Okay.
For every person that has property rights to have a business in a residential district, there are 9 people around them that are having their property rights violated. So why is that one person more important than the others? It's a democracy. It should rule.
Okay.
I'm ready to move this forward to the next step, but I really like the idea of having the attorney take a look at it and maybe talk about how a transition could take
If I could
place.
just add, I think John brought up some really important questions. And this is a conversation I've had with Jeff and with Victor before as enforcement. We can put a lot more teeth into and be a lot more proactive, whatever we end up with. I think that's been part of the lag in dealing with some of the problems that we've.
Yeah, to that point, there's teeth in it, and then it's strongly enforced. they'll quickly send out the message very quick, you know, and you won't have problems and issues because people know there are consequences that will be paid for.
There have to be consequences. Violation, revoke the license. It's real simple.
Okay, we're.
There's a place that got the book on this kind of thing. It's the villages in Florida. They regulate the amount of air you breathe. That's what we're talking about. Can't do this, can't do that, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, can't be here, can't be there, can't do this at this time of the night, can't do this at that time of the night. Bob, your truck is rusty, get it out of here.
Overregulation, I hear you. Where I come out on this is, I think short-term rentals have a value and that's worthwhile to the community, worthwhile to the owners, and but I really hear people saying they're afraid it's just gonna run away. It's gonna be uncapped, it's gonna never stop. And that's what John had in his letter very eloquently that we looked at last time. So in that regard, and I'm generally a free market guy, and I like less regulation. And I'm coming to the fact that this maybe is a good compromise if we limit it to 40 or 45 in single family neighborhoods and had unlimited in others. And I think that would serve the community well. It would give people assurance that it's not going to run away out of control, but it would still allow the benefits that the community gets from short-term rentals. So I'm in favor of it.
I will do that, Bill, but I won't do much more than that.
Okay, all right. So Jeff, what are our options at this point for the planning commission regarding next steps?
The end result would be that we would take something and we would submit it. We would, there would be a motion by the planning commission to recommend that city council take action. We could do that with what we have presented so far. If you think that there's changes that need to be made, we can make some of those changes and come back for further discussion here.
Great.
So we could do nothing, we could move it forward, or we could modify what we have.
Great. So we're missing a few members tonight that are important voices. And I'm thinking if there's anything that jumped out at the commissioners from the public comments or other, thoughts you've had about modifications, maybe we ask Jeff and John to look into those modifications, and then we bring it back for the next meeting where the full board can take a look at it. How does that grab you as you're ready to proceed, you said?
Yeah, it's just
Okay.
like, I guess we just keep kicking it down and
No, you can't.
have more people,
Yeah.
come and beg us to do something
Yeah,
and, or maybe we'll have people that don't want us to do something on that month, but.
Yeah, my biggest concern is the three members that aren't here tonight. This is an important deal and like to have their.
We could table it.
Yeah.
Just table it. I think what we have is, I can't think of any changes to suggest
Okay.
at this point. I think this is a very good, strong starting point. But maybe in the interim, we could have Jim Raymer look at it.
Okay.
So we get a report from him for next week when we can get everybody here. 'Cause I think it's a pretty big deal, and I think should be a clear decision. So the more people we have here, the better it is.
All right, so you're recommending tabling it?
I can't vote, I can't make a recommendation.
So I'll make that motion that we table this issue.
Second.
And have Jim look at it?
Yeah, and I too would do a cap like at 40, 45. I'm real comfortable with that. It feels like we're putting some control on it, where right now it seems like it's running wild.
And that's what these folks want from us. They just want us to grab control of it.
Okay, so we don't need anything, we don't need to do anything to table it, just say, or.
We really haven't taken any action
Right.
yet. I don't think that we took any action or motion to put it on the agenda. We're just not taking any action. We're getting further information for next time, so
Right.
I don't think we need any action.
All right, so the
Well-
only action item then is to loop city attorney in on this conversation.
We'll write something up, send it to Jim Raymer and get a response from him on his thoughts, concerns regarding the issue of whether it's legal, whether it's enforceable,
Great.
And transition.
Transition.
And the
That's
transition.
really the biggest concern I would have. Is
Yes.
how to manage the transition in the most legally safe way.
Great, okay. Topic closed. All right, we have one more thing on the agenda, and members of the public, we're gonna delve into the zoning code. If you didn't want to stay for that, it wouldn't hurt our feelings.
Okay,
I think you have helped a lot by being here and caring enough to express your views. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioners, would you care for just a few minutes, stand up, pray?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's do that for a minute. We're not adjourning the meeting, we're just standing up.
Recess. I need to do
Not
more.
recessing the meeting.
I need to do more than just.
More than stand up? Let's do that.
How long are we breaking for? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Old people need to get in water. Or you get frozen in place. Tried to get out of the lazy boy the other night. And I thought, I might be getting close to either a lazy boy that throws me out of this or a grab bar.
If I leave, do we lose?
Oh, I think we actually still have 5. Yes. In order, Jeff, are we back online again?
I believe I have unmuted us. I hope we're back online.
Great.
I will say that I am having issues for some reason with our Adobe Acrobat with showing the public the information in the packet. That is on our website and they can download the PDF there. And
I'm leaving, that's.
Well, but I want to express that I've been trying to scroll through and show that, but it keeps,
It kind of
for some
choked on the
reason.
map of John. but,
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's causing that, but we're having that issue and so I apologize to the public that may be watching via Zoom.
Good, thank you for explaining.
We do have one participant. Oh, no, me, I'm the participant.
Okay. But there will be people watching, so.
Potentially.
Okay, let's move on to our final agenda item, which is the beginning of our review of the zoning code. And John and team have put together a recommendation for us about some miscellaneous sections, number 1, 8, 11, 12, and 13. John, would you like to tell us what we should know?
Well, based on the chart that I provided to the commission last month, these were the first articles because they're relatively the easiest ones to go through. But it's to show you the format and it's got some policy changes in it that I can share with you. But the first article is the title and purpose, which is composed of, the title of the ordinance, what the purpose is for the area of jurisdiction and the relationship to the master plan. I don't know if you want to go through it section by section, or if you read it and we just want to hit on some of the questions that you may have.
I read through it, I'm just wondering what the changes were relative to what our original.
Pretty much almost everything that I'm writing, okay? The current ordinance is, it's very wordy. And it's organized a lot differently, but I'm not copying per se some of the initial chapters that we have here. I didn't copy and paste them into the new format. This is really new stuff. As we get into the land uses in the districts, I'll pull stuff out of the existing ordinance and bring it in, and then if I delete anything, I'll show you what I delete. If I add, I'll show you what I add to it. Okay. The reason why I wanted to start out with this format was your site plan review sections are kind of sprinkled in a couple areas in the ordinance. Article 8 really has the site plan review process and requirements all in one chapter. All right. The other articles that I prepared, like Article 11, is the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is all based on state statute provisions.
So John, I did have a question on that one. In terms of the eligibility, the membership, its rules and what it can do, what it can't do. Did you take that primarily from our existing ordinance or?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So you haven't changed, who's eligible or what their roles are?
No.
Great.
That's from your membership is from yours. Under the ZBA, like the appeals of administrative decisions, interpretations, those are all standard. That's in the statute that you have to provide. People have to have the ability to ask the ZBA for certain things. The one thing under site plan review that is if you want to go through, let's go through this. Let's go through Article 8 so you get a better understanding of what's laid out. The Article 8 is the site plan review section. Section 8.2 basically states when a site plan is required. It's pretty much required for anything that is not a single family or duplex. So you're going to require it for any commercial properties, for example, things along those lines. The the standards for site plan review are all listed in one section. And those are letter A through letter P. That's what's got to be included as part of the process of the review. And then, unlike your current ordinance, section 8.4 is a table that says these are all the site plan application requirements. What's going to be required on the plan itself or plans, because sometimes you have multiple sheets, and what's required as a part of the narrative for the planning commission. The site plan application review procedures, the applicant has an opportunity to request a pre-application conference with the zoning administrator and or the planner to go over their concept. Then there's the conceptual review. And then the zoning administrator makes a determination of completeness that we have everything for your review. But the one provision that I have in here that you don't have is section 8.5.5, which is the administrative review committee. Because the city is going through the redevelopment ready certification, redevelopment ready community certification process. It's not a requirement, but it's a strong recommendation that if a use is permitted by right in a district that requires a site plan, that site plan can go, instead of to the full planning commission, can go into administrative review, which is a committee that's composed of the zoning administrator, the planning commission chair, an additional planning commission member, the planning consultant. And it's that review committee that can review the site plan and get back their comments to the applicant, or if everything is addressed, the administrative review committee can either approve with conditions, or deny it. But that fast tracks the site plan, so they don't have to, in case they miss the deadline, they may not have to wait 45 or 60 days to get in front of the planning commission. The applicant can decide if they want to do administrative review or if they want to have the full PC review it. But
Okay, so it's optional.
it's optional. But I will tell you that in communities that have done administrative review, for example, I had a conversation with the planning director from the city of Traverse City. With all the activities they have going there, only 4 site plans last year went before the planning commission. Everything else was dealt with at administrative review level. Okay. A site plan is required to come before the planning commission if it's involved in a special use permit. It comes to you. If it's a plan unit development, it comes to you, planning commission. But if it's not, it can go to administrative review and get processed a lot quicker.
Does the review committee have the authority to say, we would like the planning commission as a whole to review this?
Yeah.
Okay.
If something comes up in a discussion.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah.
You referred to the redevelopment ready.
Communities.
This came from,
It's something that they, in their booklet, their guidebook, they recommend that in order to make the development process in a community faster,
makes a lot of sense.
that you have an administrative review component.
Thank you.
And that this group could meet at any time. Their
At any
schedule
time.
isn't fixed, so it could be a
not
faster
fixed.
response.
As soon as the zoning administrator says, I have a complete application, he could call the members and say, can we meet tomorrow or the next day, and you go ahead and review it.
Let's pause for a second. How do folks feel about that?
We have some language that touches on this in the zoning code already. We have language that states that if an applicant is modifying their site plan in some such ways, and if it's minimal in nature, that the chair of the planning commission, the city manager, and the city attorney can review it and deem that it can be administratively reviewed. So we touch on it a little bit. This expands on that. It looks like a little further.
And, and I don't know about that. I recommended the membership, but if the city manager wants to be part of the, city manager's part of it. You may want to have the fire chief or the police chief if it's a public safety issue, but the whole purpose of it is to expedite the reviews and get them from.
Well, let's stop for a second. Any other thoughts on this, commissioners? Is this a good idea?
Well, there's been times when we go through site plan review and then I just feel like it's just rubber stamping and just taking a lot of time. So I think this is pretty good. I imagine that there'd be some process whereby the review committee would report occasionally, update the planning commission.
Usually, anything that's reviewed prior to the next planning commission meeting, it would be on the report. There'd be a report on the planning commission agenda of what was approved by the administrative review committee. So the planning commissioners, if they're driving around town and see something going up, they're not surprised.
Or we're going, well, wait a minute, you guys are on the wrong track. This is not what we want to be doing.
I think anything that we do that simplifies, streamlines, and speeds up the system in an area where our building season is microscopic is a good idea.
Okay. Al, any thoughts?
No, I'm a control freak. I'd rather not see that happen, but I can understand the reason.
Okay.
Well, and I sort of agree. That's why I want to make sure that we as the planning commission have some type of authority that we can come back and say, no, wait a minute. We need to make sure we're all on the same page here or something like that. Is that possible, John, or?
No, once the administrative review board, if they approve it,
So,
then they can come in and get a zoning permit from Jeff, and they can go over to the county and get their building permit. So
Could we specify types of site plans that would go to us versus the whole? So, if Al's concerned about, certain levels of control, maybe it would be appropriate. Let's say there's a full site plan for a complete new commercial building. Even though that might not require any special land use, the planning commission might like to see that.
I put in a qualifier that it had to be 5,000 square feet or less for administrative, anything over 5,000 square feet would go to the planning commission for full review. So you can change the square footage as the trigger. You can either go smaller or higher. I picked $5,000 thinking that 5,000 would be, pretty typical small retail building. Yeah, it's pretty small. Anything above that would automatically come to the PC.
I'm all right with that.
Rick, any thoughts?
No, sounds
And those
good.
can be adjusted
It's got limits.
as they see.
All right. What else you got, John?
Once the site plan is approved by the administrative board or by the planning commission, the site plans are signed by the planning commission chair and the applicant. And site plan would require a site plan development agreement outlining the approved use and the procedural process. That closes out the record. So, once you approve the plan and it's signed and it's dated, then it's not going to change unless the applicant's got to come back to get a minor or major amendment to it. There would be fees attached to the review. I've discussed this with Jeff and with Victor, is that, and it wouldn't be included in here, but it would be more or less an administrative policy that's adopted by the city council, is that in many communities, they require an applicant to pay an escrow fee coming in that covers all of the costs for the review. It's under the theory that the taxpayer should not be paying for the review of a private development. It's got to be self-sustainable.
I think we just did that.
And we did, at last city council, correct? We did adopt that.
You did
escrow
adopt
policy.
it, okay, because
Yep.
I gave copies to these
Done
guys.
deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's taken care of. So that's the site plan review process.
Okay.
I guess I would ask Mark as a architect that's gone through this before with other municipalities, is it look onerous to you or anything?
No, I was just going back and looking up what our original standards were, compared to what you have in here. No, actually, this cleans it up, because everything's in one place, as you said. And it's not onerous at all, and I love the fact that there's a streamlined option. You know, it's by right, there's nothing controversial about it. You can just go in and, you know, reasonable people make reasonable decisions and you just get through it.
Yeah.
So I think that's, as a professional, I think that's spectacular. As far as the actual standards, that's, did these change?
Mhm. Yeah, your site plan section,
That's what I'm sort of looking at. That's what I'm thinking through right now, the standards.
I have a side question then on this topic. So we have language in our current code that some site plans are not required to go to the planning commission, that I could administratively review them, basically residential ones. We
Right.
still have
That's- yeah.
that caveat in here.
Yeah, those site plans do not go before
Sure.
either group.
With the creation of this intermediary review committee, would it be appropriate or beneficial to say that residential properties over a certain size would go to that board as well? We have some large residential homes that have sometimes required a more in-depth review. Would that be something that the planning commission would like to see for some of the large-scale residential homes, or are we still comfortable with those homes being administratively reviewed?
Doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I think that we don't need to get involved in
Yeah.
residential.
Yeah,
Just asking, this seems like a good time to bring that up as a thought, if we're happy with how that is or not.
yeah. What I like about these standards is that they're generic and they reference the other articles where these things are going to be addressed specifically. But these are mostly site related and public safety type things and general environmental stuff. So this is taken, this makes it easier. It's pretty black and white. So from my perspective, it makes things easier.
Okay. Article 11 is the ZBA stuff, which is really patterned after the state statute. I mean, we really can't tool around, we can't really revise too much with that because of the way the statute's set up. Under administration and enforcement is the duties of the zoning administrator. The idea that the city council can set fees and policies and escrow policy. There's the provision for the performance guarantees. The provision that the city, somebody comes in for an application or land use permit, site plan, special land use, that the city, it's required that they have to have all of their taxes, their fees and their assessments paid up before they can, get along with their next project. The public hearing section is, the public notices are based on state statute provisions. There's the issue on the zoning permits discussion, and then there's the violations and the penalties if somebody violates the zoning code, and what those penalties would be and what the responsibility of the zoning administrator is. And that's the Article 12. Article 13 is the amendments and severability, and that's how you go about doing an amendment, public hearing process, the effective date of an ordinance. And then the one thing that I did include in here, which is optional under the state zoning statute, is the ability for the city to have the opportunity for conditional rezoning. And that's in section 13.2, which is allowed under Public Act 110 of 2006. So that gives the planning commission, that gives an applicant the ability to come in and ask the planning commission for a conditional rezoning of their property, which may be inconsistent with the master plan. It's the state's way, when they redid the statute, it's the state's way of, best way I can tell it, say it's the state's way of codifying spot zoning. Because under some circumstances, spot zoning is beneficial to a community. And the state tried to figure out, of course, it wasn't the state. The folks that put the state statute together were a lot of professionals and lawyers representing like the Michigan Housing Association, the Board of Realtors, American Planning. It was a large group of people that put the statute together. But the conditional rezoning allows it's kind of a safety valve to allow an applicant to come in and ask the planning commission to conditionally rezone the property. If the planning commission agrees and the property is conditionally rezoned, the applicant has 2 years to carry out the project, and if they don't, the rezoning reverts back to its original classification. But this is a local policy.
So this is another tool. It doesn't say it has to be done, or
Doesn't have to be done, but it's another tool in case you end up with a situation where it may be trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It kind of gives you that opportunity to round out the edges, maybe make it work.
Would this include a site plan review?
Yeah. They have to come in with their plans. The developer, the applicant has to come in with a full set of plans. It's not a negotiated process. Conditional rezoning, the way it's set up is the applicant comes in and gives you his best shot at the project. And the planning commission evaluates it and gives it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's no, can you go back and tweak this? Can you do this? Can you add this? Is there a condition? It's an up or down review.
interesting.
And that's pretty much it with the last section. This is, like I said, wanted to start out with the kind of like the three easiest ones before we really dive into the more complex ones where we really start talking about uses and districts and all that other good stuff, special use permits, supplemental land uses.
Is it necessary back in the site plan application section that submitted drawings have to be done by, have to be sealed?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't see that. Is it in here somewhere? I just didn't see it yet.
And if I didn't put it in there, then it's an oversight on my part because they should be sealed by an engineer. Usually it's an engineer, an architect, or a licensed landscape architect.
Right.
This is for over 5,000 square feet.
Oh, no, any site plan review.
Site plan in general.
Yeah, because it's required by, the building, the Michigan Building Code requires, certain levels of work to be done by registered professionals. And so I feel that, so it should be in here too, but as far as making sure we get quality information to look at, it's really important. I sit on the county ZBA and we get all sorts of level of stuff in there. And what we're trying to do there is to up the game so that when applicants come in, you don't have to hire a professional, but you have to have a certain level of information so we can understand what's going on. And so
It's number 18 under the checklist, under the table.
okay.
So sealed stamp.
Oh, I see it now. Okay. I see it now. Okay.
That's something that we
So,
added.
so in my case, I did the site plan, I did the prints, the design, all of it
For a house?
for my house.
Yeah, you can do that. That's residential. You don't need a professional for that. But when the health safety and welfare of the public is an issue, that's when we gotta come in. Because we have E&O policies, so people can sue us.
Oh, cool.
Residentially, I think I have a little bit more leeway to say, we may need this, we may need this. Yeah. We can even, in our current zoning code, if we're far enough away from any setback lines, we can even waive the survey requirement currently. Which makes it a little easier if somebody's gonna, you know, add a deck to their home and they're 50 feet away from a property line. You know, we don't make them currently, you know, get a full survey and whatnot to do something like that. Good, so.
John, back in the ZBA section, there, you know, they have struggled a little bit with the 5 tests that they haven't. Are these in, are those in here, or is that a?
No, I don't think that's, John, we have a couple, we call them decision matrices that we've put together. Basically, Jim Raymer has identified, for instance, for a variance request, 5 or 6 items that, well, it's kind of a decision matrix of going through kind of a checklist of how does it affect the property and whatnot. And the idea was Jim Raymer reviewed various Court of Appeals cases in situations where the courts remanded back to the local municipality based on various reasons of you didn't address this specific issue, so you need to rehear the case. And we created this decision matrix to kind of make sure that we cover those through our discussion to help guide. It doesn't really tell them, you know, how they have to make their decision or anything, but provides an outline for them to follow.
Well, what we found over the years is that if we follow those matrices to the letter, there's no sense in having a ZBA. You could make that decision. Nope, sorry.
Well, I think this still
Because
requires
if you
discussion.
fail one of those,
I
you're
had,
toast. You know,
the ones that I'm used to, I had them on page, well, it's on section 11.8. I've got 5 criteria for dimensional variances. Then I had 4 criteria for use variances.
All right.
But if Jim's already come up with a set of standards that he's comfortable with, if I can get a copy of those, I can insert those in instead. If you know, that's something that you're already using, I don't have a problem putting those in.
The ones that are being used, I've observed the ZBA struggling with. And I wondered if there were better ones out there.
These are the ones that
Okay.
I've typically used. I can have Jim, you know, obviously Jim's gonna take a look at this.
Yeah.
So,
And I can get you copies of what we currently have. And in a quick skim, it looks like they're very similar, just slightly different wording. So I don't think they're that different.
Yeah, if you all agree, it might make sense to put Jim's thoughts together with the best practices that John's bringing us and see if we can help the ZBA a little bit.
One recommendation, the struggle sounds like kind of a strong word being on ZBA, but this might be an opportunity to take 2 lists.
Yeah.
And maybe even get some input from the ZBA.
Yeah, great.
Crazy idea.
That would be great.
we just gave you some.
Being kind,
Yeah.
I don't want to discriminate, I don't want to be accused of discriminating.
Thanks, John. Okay, good. All right, any other thoughts for John on this stuff?
And then these will be, the actual document, they'll be linked, right? Where you
yes,
click on one thing, it takes you right where you gotta go.
where you see like Article 6, and click it and take you
It
there.
takes you right there.
That would be brilliant.
That would be
Slide
interesting.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
we do that at the very end. Hyperlink everything, so.
Probably the
All right, well, sounds like that closes out that section. Is there any other new business or other comments?
I have something just to ask you guys to think about. My neighbor has a storage container, like the back of a truck. You know, you take the trailer apart and he's dropped that on the ground. And that's his shed or accessory dwelling or not dwelling, but building. And he stores stuff in it and behind it, between his place and ours. And I don't think that that's really a structure, or it fits the definition of an accessory building. And it's been allowed to be there as an accessory building. And do you think that's
No.
an accessory building?
Is this where the new development's
The
going?
developers love it.
Didn't we, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we ask him or tell him at CBA that that stuff needed to disappear?
He had too many accessory buildings. So somebody told him that he had to eliminate 2. And he tore down the 2 structures that were falling down in the corner. But that stayed, and then the old garage at the far end of the property stayed. And that's gonna fall down in a year or 2 anyway. But the storage container is there, it's, it's not attractive, and
Was that
it's a visual nuisance.
Was that part of the deal? I can't remember. He said, "Oh, this is leaving and blah, blah."
Let's go back in time to before that discussion, to the initial concern regarding that. Al, you contacted me regarding that storage container and the condition of some of the materials that were stored there.
Proper.
And, I had a good discussion with Larry at the time, because what do we do? How do we address this? And through discussion, one of the concerns that we had is that if we don't call it a structure, we don't have anything in the zoning code that says it can't stay. If we consider it a structure, now we have some zoning rules that can come into place. And by doing
It's not supposed to have lettering on it from the former use, and it does. I mean, and that's according to our zoning code. And to me, it's a truck with no wheels sitting on the ground.
And I don't think we really have any wording that says that can't be there. It's not a piece of equipment, it's an entire thing. So we don't really have anything that, off the top of my head, I'm just thinking of the things in our nuisance section. We address pieces of machinery. We address dilapidated, things to some degree. But we really haven't gotten into too much enforcement of dilapidated buildings unless they pose a health safety to other properties. So when we were initially having that discussion of how can we look at this storage container? And realistically, it was being used as a shed. So we felt with the idea of to be able to have some level of enforcement, if we call it a structure placed on the property, then it has to comply with our zoning regulations of an accessory building. And that at the time then would have been the 4th accessory building on that property. And we have a limitation of no more than 2 and no more than 75% of the building.
Is there a way you can go back and look at the minutes from that meting and see what it was we asked and what he promised?
Well, this
I've got
was
it in the back of my head that he promised and all that.
This was before we got to the meeting, right? This was before we had any planning commission. This was myself.
This was ZBA.
No, did he? I don't think he went to the ZBA, did he?
No, I think it was here.
It was the planning commission. Yeah. Before any board activity, I had some dealings with the property owner to bring it into compliance with zoning, because there were some other blight issues on the property. And then we got into the issue of the number of structures. And at the time, that was the stance that we took, was that we were going to consider that building to be an accessory building so that we had some enforcement. Because if it wasn't a building, we felt that we did not have any zoning authority to address that. And that may change. We can relook at that issue and see if our current review of the code differs. After
How many rats have you seen running in that?
after we had that discussion and that topic, the property owner then came to the planning commission to discuss a lot split. And because the potential split was in more than 3 parcels, it came to the planning commission as opposed to an administrative decision. And that's where we had a discussion about the condition of some of the properties and the storage structure and whatnot. And we did have a discussion at that time that before everything could be finalized and approved, that would need to be removed. And I think we mentioned that all of the accessory buildings would need to be removed, because once the final split approval happened, they would be in violation of the zoning code, because we do not permit accessory buildings on vacant pieces of property. He has not.
It would have interfered with his development plans anyway.
Yes,
So
correct.
I'm not asking to pursue him in any way, but I'm just asking, does the planning commission think that storage containers in the backyard are reasonable as accessory buildings? And if not, then as we're redoing the zoning code, I'd like to see us address it, because it's ugly.
Well, on two levels, I mean, we do say accessory buildings have to be like, the design has to be similar and all that kind of stuff, so it fails on that. And the fact that it's a vehicle that doesn't have wheels on it anymore means it's not a vehicle anymore, it's a piece of junk. So I think on those 2 points, I would say, yeah, it shouldn't be there.
I would like to get into one of the things that I put in when we listed off areas of the code that we felt needed more attention. The style and design aspect is an area that I would like to see more wording in.
I heard us in the discussion tonight that was brought up again. And, I said, I didn't know that was part of the code. It's containers, certainly not part of it. Similar to anything.
Yeah.
Well,
Except the camper that's parked next to it, being used all summer as a spare room.
I would like to see more wording in there to further define what styles we like. A couple things that have come up throughout, history in Harbor Springs is a home will be built, and then someone will say that's a style it's not Harbor Springs, right? So then, and we added, I think at some point in time, language that says there must be, your home must be in the style and design in keeping with Harbor Springs. But we never define what that style is. And we have such an eclectic range of styles already. I think we need some better language, maybe with some pictures, or some type of diagrams or something to say, here are styles that we specifically say are the style and design of Harbor Springs, and here are the ones that we specifically say aren't. I think that would give me more teeth in situations like this to have stronger ability to do some enforcement when somebody brings in something like that. Because, another thing that people are doing nowadays is buying shipping containers and building homes. And I don't know that we have strong enough language right now that if somebody wanted to do that we could stop them.
I want them to. But I hear you, Al, and I want to make a mental note to talk about storage containers and storage.
When we get to that part of the
When we get to
zoning
that part.
I would just like us to write those out of existence, if we can.
Great. Let's make a note to.
As far as an accessory building in a residential zoning district.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, any other comments or ideas to cover tonight? So it looks like our next dose of zoning code comes in November. On track with that, John?
We're a little ahead of the game here.
But yeah, November will be the next package.
And if you are ready sooner, don't hold back. I guess we could
The more time we have, the better.
keep it moving. All right.
At this point, we have not had any new applications for special land use or site plan. So we still have room on the agenda to continue talking about these short-term rental and whatnot. So
And
we're
guest quarters again.
free up for discussion stuff. So
The only thing I would say, since you brought it up, Is there any way we can truncate some of the public discussion? 'Cause we're
Yeah.
hearing the same thing,
I know, it.
meeting after meeting after meeting, and it goes on for half an hour.
I failed to mention what the rules were, keep it to 3 minutes, keep it focused, and I'll look for ways.
And John will always do that. John will take an hour if you let him.
I think he got paid by the word, right?
Yeah. And then thank you for
He's an
the,
attorney.
We have to make sure that we provide everybody the opportunity to say something. We can certainly limit them in their time. We can also certainly request that if the comments that you have stated have already been said by someone else, we don't need to rehear the same comment.
I used to do that when I was mayor. Do you have something to say that hasn't been said before?
Great.
And
Just a suggestion, it's a tool I've seen very effective.
6 feet.
When somebody starts talking, put up the counter. You can stop a little bit. You don't have to, the mayor or the chair doesn't have to be reminding people, oh, sorry, your time's up, timer says, and shuts it down.
And you get one period of comment, right? And you get to do it.
That's
3
what our
times.
standard said.
it is what the standard said, yeah.
it's just holding people to that when it's, and sometimes we'll only have 2 or 3 people and we don't need to because things flow very well. Other times there's more people and they want to say things more frequently and we have to then just get out the gavel and say, sorry.
Yeah, great, thank you for mentioning. All right, then this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. You off the air, Jeff?
This is interesting. This is an interesting